The morning of January 25, 1982, was bitterly cold on Mount Washington, a peak infamous for its brutal, unpredictable weather. At 6,288 feet, it wasn't the tallest mountain, but it was among the most dangerous, its slopes ravaged by extreme winds and sudden storms. 17-year-old Hugh Herr and 20-year-old Jeff Batzer were no strangers to climbing, but they were about to face the harshest test of their lives. Setting out to climb Huntington Ravine, a notoriously steep and icy face on the northeast side of the mountain, the two were confident. Herr had climbed the Exum Ridge of the Grand Teton at just 13, and both men had experience in the mountains. But confidence can be deceptive, and the White Mountains had no mercy for even the most skilled climbers. As they ascended, conditions worsened. The wind howled, the temperature dropped, and snow swirled into an impenetrable whiteout. Visibility disappeared, and soon so did their sense of direction. Then, one small decision sealed their fate. At the last minute, they ditched a pack, leaving behind their bivy gear, a compass, and a camera. That pack could have meant shelter and survival. Instead, it was left behind in the snow, and they had no way of knowing what lay ahead. Descending blind in the storm, Herr and Batzer believed they were heading down the southeast ridge, the correct route back to safety. They weren't. Instead, they had wandered into the vast wilderness of the northeast ridge, an isolated, treacherous expanse where no one would be looking for them. When Herr and Batzer failed to return, the New England Mountain Rescue Service was dispatched to find them. Among the rescuers was Albert Dow, a 28-year-old climbing instructor from the EMS Climbing School in North Conway. A solid 5.11 climber, he was as skilled as they came, a man who had devoted his life to the mountains. Dow was joined by Michael Hartrick, another seasoned rescuer. Together, they set out into the frozen wilderness searching for any sign of the missing climbers. They found a trail. The footprints in the snow were faint, partially buried, but they belonged to Herr and Batzer. Dow and Hartrick followed the tracks, moving quickly through the freezing wind. Then, without warning, the mountain unleashed its fury. A 3-foot-thick slab of snow, 70 feet wide, 100 feet long, suddenly broke loose. A thunderous roar filled the air as the avalanche crashed down the 30-degree slope, moving with terrifying speed. There was no time to react. The wall of snow hit them head-on. Dow disappeared instantly, swallowed by the avalanche. Hartrick fought desperately to stay afloat, clawing at the rushing snow, trying to stay on the surface as he was dragged downhill through a forest of birch and fir trees. He could hear branches snapping as his body slammed into them, the impact jarring him over and over again. Then everything stopped. Hartrick was trapped, mostly buried beneath the snow, but he was alive. His hands trembled as he reached for his radio. He had to call for help. A shaky breath, a press of a button. Avalanche. Dow is buried. Need help now. The rescue team sprang into action. Within 25 minutes, 2 rescuers arrived and began digging frantically, pulling Hartrick free from the snow. He was battered, but alive. But where was Dow? For 90 agonizing minutes, they dug through the avalanche debris, hoping, praying, that he had found an air pocket, that somehow he had survived. Then, they found him. He was buried deep, his body crushed beneath the snow. There was no sign of breathing. They tried CPR for 30 minutes, their hands working frantically against the bitter cold. Nothing. The snow had stolen his last breath the moment it hit him. The injuries were devastating. His back was broken, his shoulder shattered, ribs cracked from the force of the avalanche. A deep cut hadn't even bled, a sign that his body had shut down the instant he struck the trees. Albert Dow was dead. While the rescuers mourned the loss of one of their own, Herr and Batzer were still out there, freezing, lost, and running out of time. For 4 days, the 2 climbers wandered through the northeast ridge of Mount Washington, battered by freezing temperatures, their bodies slowly succumbing to the cold. Then, on the 4th day, fate intervened. A night manager for the Appalachian Mountain Club, out on a routine snowshoeing trip, stumbled upon them by pure chance. They were in bad shape. Herr's legs were frozen solid from the knees down. Batzer's foot was black with frostbite. They were too weak to walk, too exhausted to fight. Rescuers rushed them to safety, airlifting them out by New Hampshire National Guard Huey helicopter. But survival came at a cost. Herr lost both legs below the knee. Batzer lost a foot. And then they learned the worst news of all. A man had died searching for them. Albert Dow had given his life to save theirs. The weight of that truth was crushing. Jeff Batzer whispered in disbelief, "We don't deserve to be here." Albert Dow went up the mountain to save 2 lives. He never came back. For Hugh Herr, survival was just the beginning. He went on to redefine what it meant to be a climber. Now an instructor at Harvard's Spaulding Rehabilitation Hospital, he became a world leader in prosthetics, developing cutting-edge technology for amputees, giving hope to those who had lost limbs just as he had. But even with new legs, he never forgot the sacrifice that made his survival possible. The morning of August 12, 1995, dawned clear and cold over Mount Rainier, its towering 411-foot summit casting long shadows over the Emmons Glacier. It was a day like any other in the rugged, unpredictable world of high-altitude mountaineering, until disaster struck. At 13,500 feet, John Craver and his 2 climbing partners were pushing toward the summit when Craver lost his footing. In an instant, his ankle twisted violently, and he collapsed onto the ice, pain shooting up his leg. The injury was severe, his ankle was broken, leaving him unable to walk. The summit, just 900 feet above, was now out of reach. But far worse, so was the way back down. His partners made a fateful decision. They left him behind. According to them, they provided Craver with their extra food, water, and clothing before making the long descent back to Camp Muir, where they reported his injury to park rangers. But there was immediate concern. Craver had been described as possibly going into shock, and he was alone, high on the mountain, with nightfall approaching. Rescuers had no time to waste. At 7 p.m., a 3-man rescue team was assembled to reach Craver before the cold became life-threatening. Among them were Sean H. Ryan, 23, a seasonal climbing ranger with 11 previous ascents of Mount Rainier, and Philip J. Otis, 22, a Student Conservation Association aide. Both were young, strong, and experienced, willing to take on the deadly risk of a high-altitude nighttime rescue. The third rescuer, a SIR volunteer, had joined them, but quickly began feeling ill. Just 30 minutes into the climb, he turned back, leaving Ryan and Otis alone in the darkness. By 11:25 p.m., a radio transmission came through. The 2 rescuers had made it to 12,900 feet. The wind was picking up, the cold was biting, and they were having issues with their crampons, an ominous sign on a treacherous ice field. But they refused to turn back. They expected to reach Craver by 1 a.m. That was the last time anyone heard from them. Hours passed. When Ryan and Otis failed to check in, concern turned to panic. A second rescue team departed just after midnight, determined to find both Craver and their missing teammates. They climbed through the frigid night, their headlamps cutting through the darkness, wind whipping against them as they pushed higher. By 5 a.m., they reached Craver, but Ryan and Otis were nowhere to be found. The realization hit hard. Something had gone terribly wrong. The next day, a separate climbing party moving along Winthrop Glacier stumbled upon something disturbing: an NPS ice axe and a broken crampon at 13,000 feet. It was the first clue to what had happened. A search team followed the glacier's steep, icy face, tracing a possible fall line. Then, 1,000 feet below the discovery site, they found the bodies of Sean Ryan and Philip Otis. They had fallen to their deaths. It was a moment of shock, grief, and devastation. 2 rescuers, men who had dedicated themselves to saving others, had become victims of the very mountain they tried to conquer. The tragedy likely began with their crampon issues. High on Mount Rainier, crampons are a lifeline, spiked metal plates that strap onto boots, allowing climbers to grip the ice. But Ryan and Otis had reported problems with theirs before their final radio call. Then rescuers found a broken crampon near the suspected fall location. The most likely scenario? One of them lost traction. On steep, icy slopes, even a single misstep can be fatal. If one climber slipped, they would have had seconds to self-arrest, digging their ice axe into the slope to stop the fall. But at night, with high winds and extreme cold, reaction times are slower and mistakes become deadly. If one fell, the rope connecting them could have pulled the other down. A tragic chain reaction ending in a 1,000-foot plunge into the abyss below.